jisai būtų įjungtas.
Aha, aš tik vieną pasilieku, aš tada jau saugau, kad niekas nepavyko.
Dedu va čia va.
Aha, gerai. Taip, čia pasisiliku, viskas gerai. Niekas taip nieko nežino.
Ladies and gentlemen, checking if the mic is working. I think we're good. Again, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to this inaugural Irena Veisaitė Memorial Lecture. It is great to see you here. And just a small note that before we actually move on to the lecture, we will hear some welcome remarks by the organizers, by Irena Veisaitė family members, and partners, our dear partners. So first of all, I would like to invite my colleague, Sandra Adomavičiūtė, who is head of the Open Lithuania Foundation, to introduce the lecture and to welcome you all once again. Please, Sandra.
Your Excellencies, esteemed guests, and dearest friends, it's a great honor to welcome you all here today to the inaugural lecture dedicated to the life and legacy of Irena Veisaitė. It truly warms my heart to see you so many here gathered here in this hall. Many of you knew Irena personally as a professor, as a friend, as the founder of Open Lithuania Foundation, and a professor. For others, she has become a symbol of openness, forgiveness, and the courage to live without hatred. And for those who have never met her personally, this lecture is an invitation to encounter her through her values, thoughts, and ideas. Her words and reflections shared both publicly and privately feel especially urgent today. Irena Veisaitė was one of the most remarkable Lithuanian intellectuals of her time. She was a moral authority who believed deeply in human dignity and open society. Her commitment to democracy lasted her entire life. Around 2015, when many believed democratic values were already secured, Irena sensed how fragile they were. I will always remember saying to me, Sandra, democracy is under threat. What is happening to the world? We have to do something. With clarity and determination, she insisted on and assisted later on the restoration of the Open Lithuania Foundation in 2017. She was convinced that freedom and democracy require constant care, courage, and action. Today, we face uncertainty when the world feels less stable, when democratic alliances are under pressure, and when we open news each morning with anxiety. We understand how much we need unity, clear values, and the strength to resist hatred. Irena never stopped believing that the most important choice in the life is not to surrender to evil, but to consciously create good. She believed in forgiveness, in dialogue, and in refusing hatred. This belief is also at the heart of our Open Lithuania Foundation. On a personal note, I had the privilege of working closely with Irena during the restoration of Open Lithuania Foundation. What I remember most is her inner strength, her determination, and her refusal to give up when the roads are difficult. I truly hope that Irena would approve that even my road was difficult to climb the stairs today. She would approve that I couldn't miss this event here today. I also remember how strongly Irena insisted that I meet Anthony Richter, who played a key role in the establishment of Open Lithuania Foundation back in the 1990s. And here again, Anthony is with us, and he also played the key role in this initiative this today. Thank you, Anthony, very much. It is in the spirit that we gather today to the first Irena Veisaitė's Memorial Lecture. We are deeply honored to welcome Professor Michael Ignatieff as our inaugural speaker in this event. Professor Ignatieff is a Canadian author, historian, a public intellectual, internationally recognized for his works on democracy, human rights, and liberal values. More than a decade ago, I had the chance, Professor, speak and hear about values of open society. And one thought has stayed with me ever since. When Professor said that the enemies of open society intentionally ignore those who promote open society as patriots, but we are the patriots. We love our country. And Irena Veisaitė is the best example. Once she said that I am Lithuanian, Jewish, and European at the same time. She was a true patriot. She loved Lithuania, and she built so many cultural, educational bridges that we still stand on. I look forward to hear more insights from Michael Ignatieff, and hopefully to call action to responsibility and action. I would also like to say a few very personal words of gratitude to Irena Veisaitė's family. From the very beginning, her daughter Alina and grandchildren Michael and Daniel welcomed this idea with openness, trust, and care. Their support was not only practical, it was deeply human and gave this initiative the moral foundation. We are especially grateful that Michael later on will share a short welcome on behalf of the family. And Daniel created the visual identity of this memorial lecture, giving a form that is very elegant and meaningful. Through their presence and contribution, Irena's spirit is not only remembered, but lovingly carried forward. I will also sincerely thank the Embassy to Canada of Canada to Lithuania and Her Excellency Ambassador Janita Sautner, Vilnius University Rector Rimvydas Petrauskas, and the whole team for partnership and support. We hope this inaugural lecture will offer space for reflection and dialogue and invite us all to think more deeply about values Irena Veisaitė believed so profoundly. I wish you an engaging and meaningful lecture and warm conversation afterwards. Thank you so much.
Sandra, thank you so much for your speech, for your welcome. I have to say that I could not agree more with you about what you said about Irena's family contribution. We, for several months until this day, we were making decisions big and small, and we were really happy to have you by our side in making these decisions and co-creating this event that we are in today. Thank you for being here. Michael, thank you for being here, Alina. And we know that your son and your brother is with us in spirit. You can all take a photo by the photo wall that has a logo designed by Daniel, Michael's brother. So really, thank you. And so the second welcome and the second introductory from the family side will come from Michael. Michael Slavinsky, welcome.
Labą dieną visiems. Ačiū, kad esame kartu, and thank you for letting me speak in English as well. Hello, my name is Michael as well, and I'm Irena's grandson. I'm speaking on behalf of our family to introduce with Sandra the inaugural Irena Veisaitė Memorial Lecture. We are so grateful. Thank you to Sandra and your team at the Atviros Lietuvos Fondas for taking the time to put together this wonderful event to commemorate my grandmother, her ideas, her values, and her legacy. Thank you to Anthony Richter, whose idea and generosity has helped make this possible. You came to Lithuania in the early days when the Soviet Union was falling apart, and you understood that people like Irena, with the right resources, could help rebuild in Lithuania an open society that was democratic and humane. Thank you for helping make this event happen. And finally, our thanks to Professor Michael Ignatieff for flying to be here and agreeing to be the inaugural keynote speaker. We value your time greatly, and your ideas even more. My grandmother once explained to me why, as a university lecturer, she most enjoyed teaching early modern literature. She explained that teachers had to teach contemporary or modern literature through a Soviet or a Marxist lens. But earlier works, such as Goethe and Schiller, Shakespeare and Cervantes, didn't have this limitation. Through these authors, Irena was able to share with her students the very same liberal, humanist values that you champion in your work at a time that it was not possible to do so easily. I have tried to imagine what Irena would think of this event and of this moment in history. If she was here, I like to imagine that we would observe three things. First, she would be upset and worried. She would be upset about the wars and violence we see in Europe and elsewhere in the world. She would be worried about the attempts to undermine a unified and collaborative Europe. As anyone who visited her flat on Basanavičiaus gatvė will easily imagine, she would have spent half her day taking phone calls from her dear friends across the world to discuss the state of the world. Secondly, however, she would be happy and moved to see all of us together. She loved nothing better than gathering her dear friends together and making new ones. Again, I think of my summer holidays in Lithuania, where we were always surrounded by many of you, her colleagues, her former students, journalists, teachers, and artists. Through her, and through you, and through them, and through the conversations that I heard, I grew up learning about the values of human rights, decency, respectful disagreement, the importance of art and literature, and the values of tolerance and understanding. Irena believed that dialogue and friendship help the spread of good ideas and values. Her life is a testament to the European 20th century, and she knew at first hand what happens when evil ideas take hold. She would be made happy by today, an example of courageous ideas shared, a celebratory event that brings great people together to continue an inspiring dialogue. And this brings me to the third thing that we would see if she was here. A call to action. Irena was a doer. If she was here, she would be excited to learn what is being done to help society continue to develop in a positive direction. She would be fiercely engaged. She would be encouraging. And she would be connecting us with each other. So as we prepare to hear today's talk, I invite you to listen in the spirit of Irena and to think about what can be done. As a family, we are deeply grateful for this event. However you connect with my grandmother's story and legacy, in whatever way it speaks to you, I hope the conversation today inspires you and brings warm memories of a remarkable woman, our beloved Irena.
Dear Michael, thank you for this. Thank you for sharing personal details and personal touches in your speech. Do allow us to feel and get to know Irena even better for those that didn't have that opportunity to know her in person. So thank you for that. Now, we're really grateful to be here today in this beautiful Aula Parva. We are grateful to our partners, Vilnius University. And right now, I would like to invite His Magnificence Director, Rimvydas Petrauskas, to give his welcome speech. Welcome.
So, Your Excellencies, ambassadors, organizers, dear Professor Ignatieff, honorable guests, dear colleagues, I'm delighted to welcome you to Vilnius University, which in a few years will celebrate its 450th anniversary. All these years, Vilnius University has been at the crossroads where different disciplines and cultures have met and interacted, even in challenging circumstances. It's a place for important discussions and idea shaping not only regional, but also European intellectual space. It's hardly surprising then that Vilnius University emerged as a critical intellectual hub holding symbolic significance in Polish, German, Belarusian, Ukrainian, Lithuanian cultures. It's been an outpost of European ideas and values, whilst simultaneously mediating between civilizations. But sadly, I must admit that we are living now in interesting, strange times when morality is overwhelmed by the urge for political power, times when the meaning of a message is overtaken by the speed of information, times when universities have to fight for their place and impact in public discourse. In recent years, we have witnessed the tendencies that have shaken up Western democracies: rising populism, the expansion of mistrust in the media, and distrust in scientific facts, as well as the consequences of these violations of international law and agreements. Now more than ever, it is crucial that academic expertise reaches stakeholders and the wider society. It is times like this that we need also moral authorities, leaders who lead by example, and intellectuals who are not afraid to share their wisdom. Irena Veisaitė was a person for such times, and it is no surprise that her memory, publications, interviews, or even personal recollections of her become like a guiding light for us all pursuing serenity and wise thought. Irena Veisaitė was an intellectual of exceptional tolerance. Her tragic childhood, personal encounter with the Holocaust, and the brutal crimes of Soviet regime did not condemn her to anger, revenge, or despair. On the contrary, this experience hardened Irena's resolve to seek reconciliation. According to her, only a person who is able to overcome the psychological, social, and cultural traumas of tyrannical regimes can truly understand the real essence of freedom. Irena was one of those who achieved this kind of existential freedom and gave unique lessons for Lithuanian society. Irena Veisaitė has played a principal role in establishing and running the Open Society Fund in Lithuania. The fund she managed gained significant importance after the collapse of Soviet Union, when Lithuanians regained their independence and began spread and practice the ideals of an open society, human rights, free speech, and constructive dialogue. As she put it herself, it is possible to change government or flags overnight, but it takes days and years till people change their mentality. And it was Irena who made such an important impact of that this traumatic post-Soviet mentality would change, and Lithuania would become what it is now, an open society of open-minded, creative, and politically active people making their mark in the current history of Europe and the world. It is our great delight that Professor Michael Ignatieff, the great voice of reason in our times, will deliver the first lecture in series dedicated to her memory. When universities are ever increasingly becoming tied up with the market economy, technological progress, and the idea of a successful career more than a meaningful life, Professor Ignatieff is an academic lighthouse, helping us to find solace in the darkening ocean of troubles we live. His academic works and other publications continually revive notions that are, alas, sometimes considered banal or abstract. The ideas of democracy, human rights, human dignity, morality, and intellectual plurality. But we know that it's still important. The current seemingly unstoppable stream of events and declarations coming from different sides gives us, unfortunately, some strong reasons to be concerned about the political partnership of the Western Alliance. And it is people like Professor Ignatieff who still give hope that shared intellectual and cultural values have representatives who can articulate them with admirable coherence and persuasion. The political will for power and the lost faith of democracy are not a new normality, but a deviation from a century-old tradition that is still alive in our societies. So we share a common philosophical and cultural heritage which has formed our judicial and societal norms and principles. Hope is definitely not the same thing as optimism. It is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that some things make sense regardless of how it turns out. That is a quotation from Professor Ignatieff's book on consolation, finding solace in dark times. So I strongly believe that the legacy of Irena Veisaitė and a return to her thoughts and ideas in lectures like this one today is a source of hope. And I hope that our effort works, lives, make sense, and that this sense is strong enough to lead us from the current disorientation and despair. So once again, I welcome you all to Vilnius University and to wish you an intellectual and meaningful time and lasting memories, and also would like to express my gratitude to everyone who has contributed to organizing of this event. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Rector, for your address and for this partnership. And now it is time to invite a representative of our other partner, Canadian Embassy to Lithuania, and Her Excellency Jeanette Sautner, the Ambassador. Please, the floor is yours.
Labą dieną, Excellencios, ponios ir ponai. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. It's a personal honor to join you at this inaugural Professor Irena Veisaitė Memorial Lecture. I would like to thank Sandra Adomavičiūtė, the director of the Open Lithuania Foundation, for this opportunity, and your magnificence for hosting the event at Vilnius University. Professor Veisaitė's life stands as a profound testament to resilience and courage. She endured unimaginable hardships, but yet responded with tolerance, dialogue, and an unwavering commitment to an open society. In remembering her legacy, we are reminded that these values are never guaranteed. They must be nurtured and defended. Today's celebration of Professor Veisaitė is also an opportunity to reaffirm the values that unite Lithuania and Canada: democracy, human rights, and the dignity of every individual. The Embassy of Canada is proud that the first lecture in this series will be delivered by Rector Emeritus Michael Ignatieff, a distinguished Canadian scholar and a politician in my country, and a global voice for democracy. His reflections on embattled freedom, reinventing the liberal ideal for the 21st century could not be more timely. As around the world, whether in Europe or in North America, we see democratic principles challenged and human rights questioned. In such times, we must stand firm. We must stand together. Just a few days ago, I joined Lithuanians to honor those brave young people who 35 years ago defended freedom on the 13th of January. Their actions demonstrated the resilience and courage that democracy demands. Thank you to the organizers and all of you gathered here today to honor Professor Veisaitė's legacy by building bridges between nations, ideas, and people.
The Ambassador, thank you so much for your thoughtful remarks. And now we are coming to the lecture part of this event. Today with us, we have Michael Ignatieff, who is one among most respectful public intellectuals. As noted, not only a former politician, but a scholar, a writer, a journalist, also former president of the Central European University, and your work focuses on many things, but it is primarily human rights, democracy, open society, and the challenges that open society faces in various parts of the world at different times. And I recall in one of your earlier interviews or speeches, I'm not sure, where you said that one must walk into the future backwards so that you can observe what happened and learn and predict the future. And I hope and I believe that your today's lecture will be about that, and that you will share with us what the recent years have taught. So please, welcome.
Good afternoon. I am very susceptible to the rooms and to the environments in which I give talks, and I would rank this magnificent Aula as one of the most beautiful places I have ever spoken in my life. And it is not just beautiful, it's a tribute to something important about Lithuania, that you have universities that are 450 years old. And you have a great, unbroken connection to the best of the European tradition, and it's symbolized in this magnificent room. So it's a great honor to be here. It's a pleasure to be with my Lithuanian friends. It's very nice to have my Canadian ambassador here who can protect me at all times. And so it's also an honor to speak in memory of Irena Veisaitė. As you know, she was a Holocaust survivor, a scholar of literature, a Lithuanian patriot. She was a founding mother of the Open Lithuania Foundation. She was a humanist, an indefatigable activist, and she was a beloved friend to many in this audience, and she was somebody's grandma. So it's a pretty special moment. In honoring her with this lecture, we salute the generation of Lithuanians who were never reconciled to Soviet occupation, those Lithuanians who were never reconciled to the lies about the Holocaust in this country, the Lithuanians who remain steadfast defenders of a liberal democratic future for their people. She was a leader in a heroic generation who risked their lives to face down Soviet power and win Lithuania her freedom. And she did so at a time when many of Lithuania's supposed friends in the West urged patience, caution, waiting for the right moment. This week, Lithuanians, as the ambassador recalled for us, Lithuanians commemorated the events of January 1991, when 14 citizens died defending their city from Soviet tanks. This was an important moment in your history, but it was a historic moment for Europe as a whole, because by their resistance, Lithuanians demonstrated to the Gorbachev regime that preservation of the empire by force had become impossible. And so the freedom we celebrate today in this event is the heritage of the courage of men and women like Irena Veisaitė. And I'm honored to speak in her memory. Freedom is embattled today in Europe, and all the Baltic states are on a front line of democracy that extends from the Baltic to the Black Sea, from Vilnius to Odessa. I believe there's some Ukrainian patriots in the room tonight, and I just want to salute them for being here and thank them. They understand better than anybody in this room what this being on the front line means. You're defending yourself, but self-evidently you're defending us. From one end of the front line to the other, the indivisibility of democratic freedom is obvious to everyone. Lithuanians understand that if Ukraine were to lose its battle, and it will not lose its battle, but were it to lose it, their own freedom would be endangered. And Ukrainians, for their part, understand that they cannot defend their freedom unless European democracies lend them military, financial, and diplomatic support now. What all Eastern European states have in common, from the Baltic, Poland, the Czech Republic, Ukraine, Moldova, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, what they all understand is the challenge of maintaining a sovereign democracy and a free society on a border that places them adjacent to tyranny. And those who are adjacent to tyranny have understood this earlier than those who are not adjacent to tyranny. European democracy as a whole, beyond these frontline states, now faces the challenge of waking up to the threat that Eastern Europeans have known all along. And so we have some very difficult and painful questions to think about. Can European democracy as a whole survive when the world comes to be divided into three spheres of influence, Russian, Chinese, and American, each dominated for the first time by illiberal regimes? America remains a democracy, and there are Americans in the audience, and I welcome them and want to stress my friendship and affection for the American Republic. America remains a democracy with an independent judiciary and a free press, but Congress is cowed before a presidential regime that is illiberal, authoritarian, nationalist, and expansionist. For 80 years, European Democrats counted on American power for security guarantees, and we look to American democracy as an example. Now the security guarantees look uncertain, and American democracy is less an example than a warning. It is true that 1,000 American troops are stationed on your soil in Lithuania, and there's a rotating American presence in the other Baltic states. Germany has made commitments to your freedom as well. For the moment, the American guarantee of your sovereignty remains in place. Yet for the first time since 1991, no one in this room can be certain how long the troops will remain, or whether in the longer term America continues to believe that its security and the security of Europe are indivisible. The current American regime regards Europe as a burden, a competitor, and even a threat. It is proving indifferent about defending Europe's freedom, and if the administration presses ahead with its plan to own Greenland, it might even be willing, let's hope not, to risk destroying NATO altogether. Now, since U.S. guarantees were critical to the creation of the EU and the consolidation of democracy after 1991, the question we have to ask is this: does the possible withdrawal of the United States from Europe herald the slow disintegration of the European project and the erosion of democratic freedom on the continent as a whole? In a world divided into three spheres of influence, North and South America for the United States, East Asia for China, and Russia, the Eurasian heartland stretching from Vladivostok to the Lithuanian frontier, where, in a world divided into three, will Europe find its place, and how will Europe guarantee its freedom? Can a continent adjacent to tyranny on one frontier and facing a hostile regime across the Atlantic be able to survive? Or will it ineluctably find itself pulled inside one or other of the emerging superpower blocs? These used to be unthinkable thoughts. If there are any psychologists in the audience, they would call it catastrophizing thoughts. The problem is that now such dark thoughts are all too thinkable. But thinkable doesn't mean inevitable. We're in this room to think about these risks, and thinking about the risk clearly is the preliminary to taking the action necessary to forestall them. And her grandson reminded us that Irena cared about doing things, not just talking, doing things. So that's a challenge to us. Thinking clearly also means looking backwards. As a historian, it means understanding the lessons that history has to teach us, particularly about Europe's experience in the 1930s. The nations that secured independence after the collapse of the European empires in 1918, and that includes Lithuania, found themselves unable to preserve their freedom when squeezed between superpowers, in this case between Germany and Russia. Hungary, where my wife comes from and where I've lived for many years, Hungary was traumatized by defeat, humiliation, and loss of territory after 1918 and never found its way to a democratic path. It turned to a military leader, Admiral Horthy, who promised to reverse Trianon and regain lost territory, an objective he could only obtain by allying with Hitler and Mussolini, and that alliance led to catastrophe for Hungary. But behind the contemporary figure of Viktor Orban, to this day, stands the legacy and example of Admiral Horthy. So these interwar episodes are unfortunately deeply relevant because they continue to structure the political cultures that have made the consolidation of democracy problematic in this region. In interwar Poland, fear of Stalin to the east, Hitler to the west helped to consolidate the right-wing authoritarian regime of Pilsudski. In Czechoslovakia, Beneš and Masaryk kept democracy alive for a while, but Hitler used the pretext of Czech persecution of German minorities and the threat of Stalin to abolish democratic Czechoslovakia altogether in 1938. In Lithuania, fears of Poland to the south, Stalin to the east led to a coup in 1926, which placed the authoritarian leader Antanas Smetona in power unbroken until 1940. And when the Soviets took over in 1940, you lived the most painful and difficult years of your existence. Some Lithuanian nationalists allied with Hitler, and when the Nazi regime invaded in 1941, they collaborated with its exterminatory policies. And the Lithuanian story in 1941 is a dark parable about the moral catastrophe that can befall nationalism when it makes a pact with the devil to achieve its nationalist aspirations. The historical lesson is stark. Faced with illiberal geopolitical pressures on either side, squeezed between the millstones of authoritarian power on either side, Europe, particularly in Eastern Europe, must not repeat the mistake of the 1930s, when country after country sacrificed democratic freedom for the illusory safety and security of authoritarian rule. The further lesson from the 1920s and 30s is about the United States, and it is the isolationist and nationalist turn in the United States is not new. The America of the 1920s and 30s watched the collapse of democracy in Europe and did nothing. Beside President Trump stands some figures that we've mostly forgotten but need to remember. The Republican isolationist Robert Taft, the aviator Charles Lindbergh, the rabble-rousing populist radio personality Father Coughlin. If history is any guide, the Trump regime is not a historical aberration, but the recurrence in new guise of deeply rooted American instincts. Now, under Roosevelt and Truman's leadership, America did work itself free for a time from those instincts. It engaged in Europe after 1945 because its soldiers had fought and died to free the continent. And also because Stalin's westward expansion threatened America's vital interest. It was when Soviet communism projected itself as an ideological alternative to democratic capitalism, backed by its vast military, that American support for European democracy was at its strongest. Today, what's interesting is that the Russian threat is no longer ideological. Putin projects nothing that anybody in their right mind wants to have anything to do with. His power projection is driven by an autocracy's impulse to reproduce itself through conquest. And the Baltic states see this impulse at work every day in the gray zone cyber attacks, provocations, cable cutting in the Baltic, flyovers that violate your airspace. You live in a gray zone, neither peace nor war, and you've been doing it with great calm and courage and sang-froid, as the French would say, for a long time, but it ain't easy. American intelligence services must be aware of these probing provocations to your democracy, but thus far, the President of the United States seems to believe a deal with Putin to divide the world into blocs is more in the national interest of the United States than defending European democracy from attack and subversion. And a further sign of this, I regret to say, is that instead of choosing European friends on their democratic credentials, the US chooses its allies today on the basis of their alignment with Trump's ideological predilections. So the national security strategy of the United States embraces illiberal competitors for power in Europe as the patriotic parties, because they're aligned with the values of the Trump revolution. And this ideological alignment strengthens Europe's illiberal authoritarians in their belief that the US will support them as they dismantle Europe's democratic norms. A Europe in which the patriotic powers were to take power, Le Pen in France, AfD in Germany, joining Fico in Slovakia and Orban in Hungary, is not a Europe in which Lithuanians can take their democracy for granted. And it is possible that within Lithuanian society, I don't know, illiberal forces seeking to copy the breakthrough of patriotic parties elsewhere will be encouraged to make their bid for power. This is an issue that you have to think about. It's not my country. I'm honored to be here, and I hesitate to make any comments about your politics, but I just look at the geopolitical situation and beg you not to take your democracy for granted. As these three illiberal blocs consolidate their power in geopolitics, the illiberal forces in history, the illiberal forces in Europe, believe that history is on their side. There's a wonderful remark that Viktor Orban, my favorite politician, recently made. He was derided by his Western European detractors, and he made this remark, you know, we used to think you were our future. Now we think we are your future. It's a chilling remark, something to think about. I'm not saying it's true. I certainly hope it isn't. But it's the kind of remark that tells you something about the ways in which the patriotic parties believe history is moving in their direction, not in the direction of liberal freedom. So, this is the threat to Europe's democratic future: illiberal authoritarian consolidation into three competing but collusive blocs, and the emergence of patriotic parties with international support bent on jettisoning the liberal features of democracy, that is, checks and balance, free press, and independent judiciary, to replace a liberal democracy with majoritarian democracy that legitimizes single-party rule. That's, in my view, the chief threat to democracy in Europe today. And if this is the threat, let me offer a few thoughts about how European liberal Democrats might respond to this experience of adversity. What actions can Lithuania and Europe take to defend their democracies? One response, all of these responses are already underway. I don't need to tell you anything you don't know. One response is to seek strength in numbers. Lithuania cannot defend its democracy alone. It must seek allies and friends everywhere, including Canada, everywhere you can look. European states are now investing in joint defense, assuming most of the burden of keeping Ukraine in the fight. They're working together to deter and neutralize Russian attempts to destabilize their democracies. It's been in Northern Europe with the adhesion of Finland and Sweden to NATO and Baltic rearmament that the strongest reaction to the Russian invasion of Ukraine has occurred. The Baltic states, again, I don't need to tell you, lead Europe in the percentage of their GDP devoted to national defense. So you've taken decisive military steps to protect yourself. My country, Canada, which has troops stationed in Latvia, depended on American security guarantees for much too long, and we are now struggling to catch up and invest in our defense. But you are the ones who've shown us the way. All across Europe, defense industries are beginning to pour out munitions, defense budgets are rising, and defense cooperation is increasing. It's become conceivable for the first time to imagine a successor to NATO who defends European territory in the absence of a US security guarantee. We have to think that thought for the first time in 80 years. I don't like thinking it, but we need to think about it calmly. I believe Europe can do that, but it's going to have to take the steps. We're not there yet, and Europe needs time, and it's time that we do not have. That's the problem. Military steps need to be supplemented by strategic measures also to strengthen Europe's economic potential. Because it doesn't need saying, but strong economies are the key to sustaining strong democracies. Leading European figures like Mario Draghi have argued that Europe will be unable to rival the economic power of China and America, especially in emerging technologies, unless it can create a single market in capital, labor, and services so that it can aggregate economic strength and create companies large enough to compete on a global scale with its Chinese and American rivals. And everybody talks about Draghi as if it's an economic strategy. No, this is a strategy to stabilize liberal democracy in Europe. That's what it is. Now, the Baltic states have stepped up here. They have strengthened their economic ties to their Scandinavian neighbors. There's a vigorous ecosystem of startups that's keeping your best young talent in the region. You're building a strong reputation, particularly in Lithuania, as leading developers of software and innovation. But Europe has to develop the capacity to lift startups from incubation to European and global scale. And you can't do that unless you have larger aggregates of capital than are in your own countries. That's why the Draghi report is urging Europe to create a banking system capable of mobilizing large pools of capital and free up your regulatory environment and enable labor to move freely so as to allow Europe to remain a competitor to the other two blocs. The Draghi strategy has consequences, though. It requires further concentrating economic and political power within the European Union, more power to Brussels. Further centralization of European power is bound to trigger an illiberal populist challenge based on defense of nationalist traditions and the sovereignty of 27 member states. And this is the core political problem you've got. I'm a very strong believer in defending sovereignty, national tradition, national languages, national culture, but not when it results in a splintering of the capacity of Europe to pool capital, simplify services, aggregate labor mobility, so that as a continent you can respond to what it seems to me is an existential challenge to the future of liberal democracies. Defenders of liberal democracies will have to convince European voters that the best way to defend the national identity of each member of the Union is to transfer some sovereignty upwards, so that a single market, defense policy, foreign policy, immigration policy, sealing borders while maintaining a strong legal immigration stream, becomes the guarantee of the sovereignty of all. This has been the liberal democratic challenge in Europe all along, persuading reluctant voters that the best hope to maintain control of their own sovereignty as actors on the global stage is to pool sovereignty, to give each of the 27 the global power that none can achieve alone. It's the failure to achieve that objective, global economic power and political coherence in a united Europe, combined with a failure to be effective sovereigns at home, that is the single reason why liberal democracy faces an illiberal challenge at home and why it's failed so far to meet the authoritarian geopolitical challenge abroad. I've been very pessimistic. You must feel as if I'm pouring one glass of cold water down your neck after another. But it's so that we face some realities. That's my point. I'm actually extremely optimistic. I wouldn't come here if I didn't believe passionately in the future of Lithuania, believe passionately in the future of my own country. But we've got to wake up. That's what I'm saying. We've got to figure out, we've got some tough choices to make. If you ask me why I've been a liberal all my life, despite considerable political failure as a political actor, one reason is that liberalism is the only political system, the only view of politics that has ever successfully guaranteed for a long time the real retail freedom of ordinary citizens. And it's the only system that has extended this freedom to people who've never included in its promise before. And if you ask me what liberalism is, it's very simple. It's one sentence, is what I tell my students. Liberalism is power checking power to keep the people free. This vision of power checking power is the core of how liberal societies have guaranteed freedom. And freedom is the key to innovation, it's the key to civic courage, it's the key to resilience. Only free peoples, or people who feel themselves to be free, can defend their freedom. But liberal states need to confront their failures, their failure to control their borders, their failure to devolve powers upward to the Union, their failure to maintain sovereign order and growth at home. The liberal state that I've served most of my life, and my father before me served, has been captured by special interest. Our capacity to act has been hobbled by the multiplication of veto points throughout our system. And we've, above all, failed to close the gap between the fiscal capacity of the state and the social welfare expectations of our citizens. There isn't a liberal state in continental Europe that is maintaining budget balance. And some of the most important states, France and Spain, haven't had a budget in a couple of years. I've got a student who I taught at Harvard who's the budget minister of the government of France, and she can't get a budget through her parliament. This is the kind of crisis of liberal institutions that is not a million miles away from you. If France can't get a budget through, if Spain can't get a budget through, if these societies begin to crack, what happens in France? You get a far-right government in France in 2027. That's what you get. And the environment in which you defend your freedom in Europe just loses one ally, a very important one, France. Yes, I'm gloomy, but catastrophizing like this helps us to think the worst in order to avoid it. And when gloomy thoughts lead to action, that is what we call rational politics. Diagnosis is the precondition for treatment, and treatment is the precondition for cure. Once we have an accurate diagnosis of the ailments that threaten liberal democracy, a cure seems possible. The hour is late, and the cures depend on elements that are invariably in short supply everywhere: leadership, skill, and courage. But here's the thing that I want to say particularly to Lithuanians. Leadership, skill, and courage have never been in short supply in your country, in that generation epitomized by Irena Veisaitė. All across the Baltic states, but especially in Lithuania, civil society actors took the initiative to win freedom when citizens of larger and less exposed countries held back or urged caution. There's a paradox here that I want to conclude with. The smaller the country, the more exposed it is to geostrategic risk, the more likely it will take the risks necessary to maintain its independence. This seems to me one of the secrets of the Lithuanian story that larger countries need to think about. You took risks for freedom that most other people in 1991 thought were just crazy. And here we are. So that's an important lesson. It's an important, encouraging lesson. It has been the Baltic states who've boosted their defense expenditure. The Baltic states, where a startup culture of innovation has sunk the deepest roots in Europe. It's Estonia who defied Russian cyber attacks to shut their country down. It was Lithuania who refused to be cowed by Chinese attempts to bully it over Taiwan. It was Lithuania who stood up to bullying from Putin's ally, Belarus, and has given sanctuary to political refugees from Putin's regime. So look, I'm not here to urge you to take further risks that would be imprudent. You know better than I what risks you must take for you to survive. But I do want to salute you for reminding your European partners that there's more opportunity for skill, courage, and leadership than larger countries seem to think. I hope I'm right in thinking that if Irena Veisaitė were in the audience tonight in the front row looking up at me, she would agree. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are these on? I think so, yeah. Thank you so much. It means so much to hear your words and the consideration and the analysis. I'm not here as an expert. I'm here as someone in my day job who is a teacher, used to organizing teenagers, and hoping that in the audience we have some questions, some reflections, some provocations to get more reflections from you, Professor Michael Ignatieff. So this is now open to the floor. We're keen to hear from your questions and your thoughts, with one request: if you could keep them shorter and to the point, so we can have as many as possible.
Thank you for a very, very interesting talk. I was intrigued by your comment that you believe that the current situation in the United States is a revival of deeply rooted American instincts. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that and also comment to what extent you believe that these deeply rooted instincts are commonly shared by current members of American society.
Mm-hmm. Should we take 2 or 3 questions, and then we will come through them? Thank you for that question. Excellent. Any other questions?
Thank you, Professor. First of all, thank you for your warm words for Ukraine. I'm a director of the OSF Foundation in Ukraine Renaissance Foundation, Alexander Sushko. So let me ask you a question on the very basics. You rightfully mentioned that there is an obvious erosion of some fundamentals of liberal democracy, and there is a big debate about the origin, the reasons, and how to deal with this. We have some specific issues on that, but more, I think the basis, one of the most evident, is that the people in the liberal democracy feel themselves more and more disconnected from the substance of policy making, from the states. And this is obvious everywhere. The specifics may be different, but this is something which people say that we do not feel ownership any longer. So how to deal with this? What is your observation on this? It is possible to solve in certain perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's start with those two. So first on the revival of deep-seated American.
I was hoping I'd have an easy time of it, and I've just been asked two very important and difficult questions. Look, America, I spent 15 years there, I did my degrees there, I taught at Harvard for 8 years. It's a very robust, very old democracy that is in the middle of, in some ways, the most serious crisis since the Civil War. My speech said there is an isolationist strand in American politics and American traditions that goes back a very long way, back to Washington and Adams warning against foreign entanglements. So this is a deep thing. But my point was that I was really making a simpler point, which is I think one of the things that some Europeans are saying about the Trump regime is that it's a passing intoxication and normal service will soon be resumed. And I simply wanted to make the point that some of the instincts that Trump is appealing to have much deeper roots in American society, and you've got to assume that this second Trump term will change America in pretty substantial ways, it seems to me. I don't think you can see this as a kind of nightmare interlude that will be then followed by some nice Democratic president who looks like Obama, you know, and it'll all be over. I just think we can't think that way. We have to assume that America is in a crisis in some sense that began in the 1960s when I first went to Harvard. For liberals of my generation, this was a moment of emancipation. Black civil rights, the beginning of feminism, the emergence of gay rights. It was a period in which my generation actually ended a war, or we thought we had in Vietnam. So, but for millions of Americans, it was the moment when America lost its way. It was the moment when racial hierarchies were overturned. It was the moment when the family lost its central place in stabilizing American life. It was the beginning of the long, slow, secular decline of religion. So, in other words, Trump is picking up an accumulating sense that the country's gone wrong, that accelerated after 9/11, that accelerated after the 2008 crash, but it's been coming for 60 years. And that's why I don't think you can look at Trump foreign policy as just a passing phase. So that's one thing to say. The second thing to say at the same time, and this makes it complicated, is that he's very unpopular. This is not a hegemonic project. Part of why he's so astounding is that he doesn't care. That is, he's dominating the political system because he's thrown prudence, caution to the winds. And he's aware that 45, 46, close to 50% of the country thinks this is the wrong way to go. Not necessarily because they think you ought to be more engaged in Ukraine or do some of the things we care about in Europe, but because he thinks they're running the economy into the ground. And many Americans think, why are we making enemies of people who have been friends for 80 years? What is this? It's not popular to go after Canada. When did Canada give us a problem, right? Why are we going after Greenland? I wake up this morning and a United States newspaper, the New York Times, runs a piece by an American columnist who's actually on the center right, he's not on the left, who just began the column by pointing out that he started his column with a story about a Danish soldier who got his leg shot off. Where was that Danish soldier? He was in Afghanistan. Who was he fighting with? American patrols. How did we get to a situation where the country, Denmark, which per capita supplied more soldiers to American foreign overseas expeditions than any other country, end up being a strategic enemy of the United States? A lot of Americans think this is nuts. So it's important to hold that in mind. In other words, it's important to hold two difficult thoughts in your mind. This comes from a long assembling crisis on the one hand, and on the other hand, because it is a democracy, the outcome is not decided. Depends on what happens in 2026, 2028, 2032. This is a country fighting for its soul, and unfortunately, Europe has to, not a lot that Europe can do to change that, but I don't think this history is written in advance. That's why, as someone said, we walk into history walking backwards. Can't see the future, but we can see this 60-year crisis. So that's one thing. The excellent question by my Ukrainian colleague is, in a sense, related to this. It's connected to this, a sense of disconnection from American democracy and a sense of disconnection from European democracy that is, it could be called a kind of crisis of representation. Democracy is going through a crisis of representation. We don't trust the people we elect. We don't trust them not to self-deal, so that we don't trust them not to be corrupt. We don't trust them to listen. We don't trust them to respond to us when we think you're about to do something crazy, right? And some of this is extremely well-founded. It's not just media churn. American democracy has been extremely disappointing to ordinary citizens for a couple of generations. And then there is the phenomenon that we're all struggling with, which is social media. I was in Canadian politics for 5.5 years. Here's the thing about democratic politics. You go into a room and you shake hands all evening, you talk to people, and in 6 years of doing that, I must have shaken 30,000 hands. They didn't vote for me, but I can count on the fingers of one hand the number of people who were unpleasant. Because civility, the basic rules of civility, prevailed. People understood he's doing it. It's a difficult, nasty job being a politician, so I'm going to let him do what he does. I'm not going to vote for him, but I'm not going to abuse him to his face. Social media, on the other hand, was such a sewer that my wife said, you're not going to look at your social media for 5 years, because if you do, you won't get out of bed. So there's been a breakdown of the civility rules that used to govern the relationship between elected representatives and their citizens, because social media disinhibits. As the famous cartoon has it, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog, you know? And people behave like dogs on the internet. And this disinhibition has broken a contract of trust. So it's both sides. You have self-dealing politicians who don't listen, but you also have an electorate that is frightening to vote to politicians. I'll be frank, frightening. And so this breakdown of trust is a serious crisis. And I haven't got a clever solution, because I don't see how the regulation of social media can put this genie back in the box. What I do see is when politicians break through, I've been in rooms and watched a great politician work, and you can see that leadership can make a difference. I don't want to reduce it to personality characteristics, but good politicians, brave politicians, courageous politicians can form a bond of trust. And the really great ones do what they say they're going to do. You know? This is how trust is maintained and reproduced in political systems. They do what they say they're going to do. I mean, I don't want to get sentimental here, but the most dramatic example of democratic political leadership I have seen in my lifetime was when your president, on the first morning of the invasion of your country, showed up and did a social media post in front of the government buildings of your country and said, "I am here." That does more good for democracy than a million speeches. I'm not saying he's perfect. There are problems. I don't want to, but that matters. That inspired every Democrat in the world. Certainly inspired me.
Thank you. Are there any other questions to follow?
Good afternoon. At the beginning of your presentation, you said the importance of speaking up when others are waiting for the right moment. Now looking in the international arena, and if you would be a Canadian Prime Minister, what would you say to the American leadership at the moment?
Well, you should all be, and Canadians should be very relieved that I am not the Canadian Prime Minister. I wanted to be the Canadian Prime Minister, it's no lie, but we've got a good one. We've got a good one at the moment. The one thing you can't do with an American president is give him a lecture. One of the weaknesses of small countries is and Canada is a huge country physically, but it's a small country. We've got 40 million people, 40, whatever it is. Small country in an enormous landscape. And we share the same geography. And when we try and lecture the Americans, it sort of doesn't work. And it becomes a kind of empty virtue signaling, which is the death of liberal politics, in my view. You have to follow it with action. He's saying, I think Mr. Carney is in Beijing as we speak because he thinks the only way to get the Americans to listen is to set up competing relations with the Chinese that force the Americans to realize that we can do business with other people. That's an action that speaks larger than words. He's in Europe constantly, he's in the Middle East constantly to leverage resources that enable us to diversify. But we've got some very tough moments ahead. I mean, I represent nobody. I'm not speaking for the Canadian government. I know Mr. Carney. I respect him, but I don't, I have no official position. But this Greenland thing is a really serious issue for our country because we have the sovereignty of the Northwest Passage, which is the big ship route from Asia to Europe. And as the ice melts, it becomes a more and more strategic asset. The difficult problem for us is that since the 1980s, the Americans have denied that the Northwest Passage is an inland waterway exclusively controlled by Canada. So the most powerful country in the world thinks that we don't have a right to a 2,000-kilometer route across our northern frontier. A country that is telling Denmark, we really don't think you should own Greenland, will be strongly tempted to say something similar to Canada about that Northwest Passage, because it's a strategic asset of immense importance. So, like the Danes, Canada will have to do more than diversify. We may have to say no. And then we see what happens. And this is very unfamiliar and very unpleasant and very difficult because we have said no before, but in a different geopolitical world. We have said to the Americans for 40 years, the Northwest Passage is an inland Canadian waterway. And we reached an agreement with the Americans in which we agreed to disagree. The Americans say, well, you think it's an inland waterway, we think it's an international strait. In the old world that we have left, you could agree to disagree with your neighbor. We're now in a world where we just don't know whether we can afford to disagree and get away with it. I'm sorry to be gloomy, but this is the world we're in, and I think Lithuania knows that it is a small country that has to maneuver in this environment. But Canada, also a small country, is learning the same painful lesson.
We have time for one more question.
Hello, can you hear me? I have a question on the liberal democracy. Darren Acemoglu, MIT professor and Nobel Prize laureate, he's making a round on the reasons for why we have a failure of a liberal democracy. And one of the arguments he's making is that if you look at the statistical data just at the United States, since 1980, the well-being of those highly educated definitely improved. So no complaints there. But if you look at the uneducated ones, the well-being deteriorated dramatically. So why are we surprised that people are looking at the prominence of a liberal democracy and are saying, this is not good for me, as the one who is not benefiting in the economic growth, who's not benefiting from competitiveness of international trade. So make America great really sounds good for me. So where did we fail? What policies did we fail that people increasingly are looking back and saying, no, this is not good for me?
That's another very challenging and good question. I don't think there's any doubt, I'd go this far towards you, that beginning in the 1970s, accelerating in the 1980s and 90s, was the rise of new forms of inequality that the liberal democratic consensus of the time failed to see, failed to do anything about. And as the society began to fracture, liberal democracy lost its capacity to be convincing to its citizens. So that you have a society where anybody like me who got a college education and then a postdoctoral education did pretty well. The biggest divide in electoral politics in the United States is educational level. Those who complete high school only or do not complete high school vote one way. Those who complete college and vote another way. But that's a story about where advantage is distributed, but it's also a story about where respect is distributed. One of the most disturbing questions for leaders of universities is the ways in which universities have become the institution that apportions respect, and those without university credentials don't get the same respect. And so we have a division that's both a division of income but also a division of respect, and that resentment at being disrespected is corrosive. So that's one source of inequality. The other is global free trade has been massively good for millions of people, but it has left deindustrialized communities behind that feel they are not listened to, not respected, and live without hope. So it goes back to the questions our Ukrainian colleague asked. I mean, liberal democracy is permanently on trial. It's permanently on trial in terms of its capacity to deliver security and rising standards of living to citizens. If it doesn't deliver that, people say, this system is not working for me. Trump has built a huge constituency of people who believe the system has failed them. The other complication is that liberal democracy from 1965, in its embrace of the right policy, which is racial equality, upturned or overturned the racial hierarchy that I remember from my childhood. I remember going to, as a very young child, to places in Virginia where it said a bathroom for whites, a bathroom for colored people. In my lifetime, this has been destroyed, but it overturned hierarchies that were extremely threatening to white populations used to racial privilege. So liberalism is paying the price of its success, expansion of university education, overturning of racial hierarchies. It's paying the price for that. And it's paying the price for its failures to address the fact that liberal globalization of the kind we liked left a lot of people in the Rust Belt, in manufacturing sectors in the heartland of Canada and the United States, thinking the system has deserted them. And they want someone to deliver, and tariffs won't. The thing we need to think about is the solutions that the Trump administration proposes will not solve the problems they are trying to address. And so the thing you ought to be worried about, I think we all ought to be worried about, is what happens when the Trump revolution fails. That's the thing that keeps me awake. I actually want it to succeed in the sense that if he's promising manufacturing jobs coming back to the United States, I'd like to see that happen. I just don't think it will. And when it doesn't, the disillusion, the anger, the sense of betrayal will truly endanger American democracy. So those are, I can't seem to avoid giving you gloomy thoughts to end with. I do want to, the one thing I want to come back to, which I said from the podium and believe passionately, is that I teach the history of liberal political thought and have done so for 25 years. Liberalism is not a perfect vision of the world, and it has some of the problems that we've just been looking at. But the liberal idea that the purpose of a political system is to create a community of free individuals. And the purpose of the freedom is to respect their agency as human beings, the extraordinarily diverse way in which they conceive of what a good life for them would be. That vision of a political system whose purpose is to enhance and respect your freedom seems to me a very powerful idea. And it's dependent on something else, which I think is another liberal idea that is very strong, which is that power is very dangerous. Power in anyone's hands is very dangerous. So the purpose of your institutions is to have power checking power to keep the people free. And the power we're talking about is a free media, free universities, a judiciary that is free, private institutions, civil society institutions, all of the institutions that protect and guarantee our freedom, one of which is the foundation whose creation we're celebrating today. These are the integral elements of a free society that we must all defend. And this is the aspect of, if you ask me why I'm a liberal and why I'm unapologetic about it, despite all of our very manifest freedoms, it's because this set of commitments respects the agency and dignity of individual human beings and the variety of the ways in which they think a good life should be lived. And it then sets up the institutions of counterpower that protect that freedom. And Irena Veisaitė believed in that ideal, and that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Dear Professor, thank you so much for the insightful lecture. But also, I have to say, your answers were also thought-provoking, just like your lecture was.
I went on too long. I talked too long.
And it is a good thing. And thank you, Michael, so much for helping moderate this session. We are almost there, but we have one item in the agenda that separates this moment and when we will be having a conversation over a glass of wine. And that is us, Open Lithuania Foundation, wanting to say thank you and express our gratitude to everyone involved with the planning and organization of this lecture. If we look closely into what it says, could we lift the piece so that we can all improvise and interpret, right? But what we see here is that in addition to the noise that, you know, gramophone usually represents, there also has to be some ability and some intention in listening, right? And accepting those ideas that are there and making sure that something comes out that allows, you know, us to have seeds to work with. And we will just go slowly, and I have to say, like, it looks like we have two different things, but it actually is not. We have framed the piece. The piece is art piece of the famous Lithuanian graphic designer whose name is Augustinas Bidlauskas, and we framed the ones that are staying here in Vilnius, and we put them in a more compact package for people that are traveling back home. So, Professor Michael Ignatieff, thank you very much. Dear Alina Baum, dear Michael Slavinsky, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your help. Our dear partner, Vilnius University, Rector, please accept. Your Excellency Ambassador, we have one frame for you. And our dear friend, Anthony Richter. You will get the one in a tube. Please accept it. And we know that Anthony always has something to say, and we would like to hear, and for him to close this event. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I just want to congratulate the Open Lithuania Foundation, Atviras Lietuvos Fondas, and the university, and Michael for successfully, I think, both invoking and honoring Irena Veisaitė's legacy, and also activating her role and ideas as a public intellectual to take us through difficult current times, to think deeply about them. So thank you.
I think now it is safe to say that it is time for us to enjoy ourselves. There are snacks and drinks just outside. Welcome. Please take your time, stay around, do not run away, and thank you for being here.